seems fair.
Yep, I'll drop a plane out of the sky.
Charting exit route. What's happening? Oh, it's...
Heart or no heart, I'm coming.
You've got no imagination.
Heart of Stone is a 2023 spy action thriller film, and what follows is a complete analysis and explanation of its narrative, themes, characters, and production. The film, directed by Tom Harper, opens not with a slow burn, but with a high-altitude mission in the Italian Alps, immediately establishing its debt to the globe-trotting spectacle of the Mission Impossible franchise. This opening is a calculated piece of misdirection, presenting a conventional MI6 team on a standard extraction mission, with Rachel Stone conspicuously placed in the support van, seemingly the least experienced member of the group. The film uses this initial setting to create a facade of normalcy, a familiar spy thriller landscape, before systematically dismantling it to reveal a much larger, more technologically fantastical world operating just beneath the surface. The entire opening sequence is a magic trick, directing the audience's attention to the action on the ground while the true nature of the film's protagonist is hidden in plain sight, a strategy that mirrors Stone's own role within the team. Heart of Stone's central premise hinges on the existence of the Charter, a clandestine peacekeeping organization that operates completely independent of any government. This concept is the film's primary world-building contribution to the spy genre, moving beyond the traditional nation-state rivalries of James Bond or Jason Bourne. The Charter is presented as a necessary evolution in global security, an entity free from the political constraints and competing agendas that hobble national intelligence agencies. Its agents, codenamed after playing cards, are a secular order of monks devoted to a singular, data-driven mission of stability. The film argues, through the very existence of the Charter, that true global peace cannot be achieved through patriotism or political ideology, but only through a technologically enforced neutrality that elevates the safety of the collective over the sovereignty of any single nation. At the technological core of the Charter's power is the Heart, an artificial intelligence of unprecedented predictive and intrusive capability. The Heart is not merely a supercomputer. It is a near-omniscient digital deity that can hack any system in the world and calculate probabilities to guide its agents with what the film terms dead-point accuracy. This AI is the ultimate deus ex machina, capable of controlling traffic grids, communications networks, and financial systems to create perfect escape routes or deadly traps. The film's central dramatic and philosophical question is embedded in this creation. Is a world run by a benevolent, perfectly logical algorithm a utopian dream or a fundamental surrender of human agency? The heart is simultaneously the team's greatest asset and its most profound existential threat, a tool that solves immediate tactical problems while creating a deeper spiritual one. Gal Gadot's Rachel Stone is constructed as a character of dual, conflicting identities. To the MI6 team, she is a green tech operative, a risk-averse desk jockey who is out of her depth in the field. In reality, she is the Nine of Hearts, a seasoned charter agent who has been deep undercover for 2 years, and this performance is the key to her character. Gadot is tasked with playing an actor, and the film's dramatic success hinges on the subtle cracks in her facade during the first act. When she is forced to break cover to save her team in the Alps, the action is not just a physical reveal, but a psychological one. The film explores the profound loneliness of this existence. A woman who has formed genuine bonds with her MI6 colleagues under entirely false pretenses, knowing that the friendships are as much a part of the mission as any intelligence report. The film introduces Jamie Dornan's Parker as the charismatic, capable MI6 team leader, a role that relies heavily on Dornan's natural charm to lower the audience's defenses. He is written as the quintessential field agent, competent, protective of his team, and possessing a dry wit that cuts through the tension. His dynamic with Stone is initially built on a gentle, almost patronizing mentorship, a classic trope that the film deliberately exploits. This careful construction of Parker as a trustworthy, if slightly conventional, ally is a narrative-long con, designed to make his eventual betrayal one of the most potent moments in the film. The script deliberately withholds his inner life, presenting him as a familiar archetype so that the revelation of his radical, vengeful ideology feels like a true narrative earthquake. Alia Bhatt's Kia Doan enters the narrative as the catalyst for chaos, a brilliant and mysterious hacker with a personal vendetta. Her character is the most modern element of the film, a cyber-terrorist whose battlefield is code and whose motivations are rooted not in grand geopolitical schemes, but in intimate, corporate-fueled tragedy. Bhatt brings a coiled, youthful energy to the role, portraying Kia as someone who is technically peerless but emotionally volatile, a young woman whose prodigious intellect masks a deep, unhealed wound. She is introduced as the antagonist, but the script cleverly positions her not as an ideologue, but as a grieving daughter with a very specific target, making her a far more sympathetic figure than the standard megalomaniacal villain. The philosophical conflict of Heart of Stone is articulated through a direct clash between computational logic and human empathy, a debate that the film externalizes in action. The heart operates on a brutal calculus of probabilities, often advising Stone to sacrifice individuals to ensure the success of the larger mission. Stone's character arc is defined by her repeated refusal to accept this cold arithmetic. In the Alps, she reveals her cover to save a team member, an act that the heart calculates has a 97% probability of blowing her cover and compromising the mission. This pattern of defiance is not framed as mere insubordination, but as a heroic commitment to a higher, Messier moral code, one that argues a single life is not a statistically acceptable loss. The film's central, visceral twist occurs in a claustrophobic room where Parker reveals his true nature. After the chaotic Lisbon chase, as the team regroups and Stone's true identity has been exposed, the atmosphere crackles with betrayal and confusion. In a moment of cold, sudden violence, Parker executes their teammates Young and Bailey. This scene is the film's point of no return, a brutal severing of the narrative's previous loyalties. The murders are not just a plot point to raise the stakes. They are a thematic statement about the end of innocence for this story's world. It transforms Parker from a potential rogue agent into an irredeemable force, and it violently strips away the last vestiges of Stone's fabricated MI6 life, leaving her with nothing but her mission. Parker's motivation, once revealed, adds a layer of tragic complexity to his villainy. He explains that in 2015, on a Black Ops mission in Chechnya, he and his team were deliberately left for dead on the orders of the Charter's King of Clubs, who authorized a drone strike on their position to eliminate a target. Parker alone survived, his heroism buried by MI6, his team turned into a footnote by the very peacekeeping organization that claims moral superiority. His quest for revenge is framed as a dark mirror to Stone's own growing doubts about the Charter. He is the unheeded warning, the living consequence of the heart's unforgiving logic, and his argument that the Charter's godlike power is inherently corruptible becomes the film's most compelling challenge to its own premise. The globe-trotting action sequences in Heart of Stone are a study in high-concept, location-driven spectacle, with Lisbon serving as a prime example. The car chase through the city's narrow, hilly streets is a clever inversion of the genre, beginning with Stone on a motorcycle and then transitioning to a commandeered vehicle. The production design uses Lisbon's distinct architecture, its steep inclines and tiled facades, not as a backdrop, but as an obstacle course. However, this sequence also reveals the film's primary aesthetic weakness, an over-reliance on digital effects. While the physical choreography is well planned, the heavy use of CGI to composite Gadot into the action creates a slightly weightless, video game quality that undercuts the visceral immediacy the film desperately wants to achieve. The narrative's second major location is an isolated, high-tech bunker in Iceland, which becomes the arena for the final confrontation. This shift from crowded urban spaces to a sterile, wintry fortress is a deliberate visual metaphor for the film's thematic journey into cold, unfeeling logic. The bunker, with its brutalist concrete corridors and humming server rooms, is the architectural embodiment of Parker's philosophy and the heart's soulless nature. The final fight between Stone and Parker is a brutal, close-quarters brawl, a rejection of the high-tech spectacle that came before in favor of a raw, human struggle. It is in this dehumanized space that the film's core argument, that human can triumph over programmed probability, is physically tested. The underutilization of a titan like Glenn Close is one of the film's most glaring missteps. Cast as the King of Diamonds, a high-ranking member of the Charter's leadership, Close brings an immediate and unearned gravitas to her brief scenes. She is introduced in a posh setting, the very picture of serene, patrician power, embodying the old guard authority of the organization. Her character's primary narrative function is to be a victim, perishing in a dramatic elevator drop orchestrated by Parker using the heart's control systems. The death is intended to illustrate Parker's ruthlessness and the heart's terrifying scope, but it wastes the potential of a heavyweight actor and leaves a fascinating corner of the Charter's power structure completely unexplored. Similarly, B.D. Wong's appearance as the King of Clubs is a cameo that only hints at a complex internal world. He is the man who made the callous decision in Chechnya, the direct architect of Parker's rage. A brief video call between a captive Wong and Parker is the film's most fascinating dialogue scene, as Parker forces him to admit his crime. Wong's performance is a masterclass in contained terror, the look of a powerful man realizing his amoral choices have finally come home to roost. This scene crackles with a dramatic tension that the rest of the film often lacks, precisely because it is a quiet, ideological showdown between two men who represent the opposing failures of a system, the cold-blooded leader and the vengeful soldier he created. The screenplay, penned by Greg Rucka and Alison Schroeder, attempts to graft a sophisticated ethical debate onto a high-octane action template, with mixed results. Rucka, a celebrated comic book writer known for his character-driven espionage stories like Queen and Country, provides the underlying grit and moral complexity. Schroeder, who wrote the Oscar-nominated Hidden Figures, brings a proficiency for making technical concepts accessible and for highlighting the intelligence of overlooked individuals. The clash of these talents is visible on screen. The film is constantly wrestling with a desire to be a thought-provoking meditation on AI, while simultaneously checking the boxes of a Netflix algorithm-engineered global blockbuster. The result is a script that is structurally sound but emotionally crowded. The visual effects of the heart are a significant component of the film's aesthetic, attempting to visualize a non-corporeal entity. When Stone is connected to her handler, Jack of Hearts, the AI's data stream is often superimposed onto her field of vision, a translucent, glowing interface that maps probability pathways, identifies threats, and provides schematics. This augmented reality viewpoint is a narrative device as much as a visual one, directly showing the audience how the Charter can orchestrate a perfect escape. However, this digital overlay also serves to distance the audience from the action, making Stone feel less like a skilled agent using her wits and more like a video game character being guided by a player. The technology that makes her superhuman also makes her less relatable. Matthias Schweighofer's Jack of Hearts functions as the film's man in the chair, Stone's anchor to the charter and the literal voice of the heart in her ear. He is the film's primary source of comic relief, a tech genius whose social awkwardness and gentle panic are a contrast to Stone's stoic competence. Their banter is the closest thing the film has to a consistent, warm relationship, a pseudo-sibling dynamic built on years of shared secret work. Jack is entirely a creature of the digital world, and his vulnerability is profound when the heart is taken offline, stripping him of his power and purpose. His character embodies the film's secondary argument, that a total reliance on a single system is a critical weakness, a lesson he learns existentially when his digital god falls silent. Sophie Okonedo's Nomad, the King of Hearts, serves as a stern, pragmatic mother figure to Stone and the moral backbone of the Charter's field operations. She is not an ideologue but a manager, someone who believes in the organization's mission while understanding the necessary burdens of command. Her relationship with Stone is one of mutual respect tinged with professional tension, as Nomad is often the one enforcing the very rules and probabilistic decisions that Stone rebels against. The scene where Parker shuts off oxygen to her and Jack is a race-against-time sequence that effectively uses Okonedo's quiet, determined performance to raise the stakes. Her character represents the human, empathetic face of a system that is often cold, a leader who makes the numbers-based decisions but never takes them lightly. The film's sound design and score, by Henry Jackman, work in concert to manufacture a sense of urgency and grandeur that the script doesn't always earn. Jackman's score is a propulsive mix of orchestral tension and electronic pulses, perfectly calibrated for the modern action thriller. It swells heroically during Stone's moments of defiance and drops into a deep, synthetic dread when the heart's power is being abused. The sound design is most effective in the film's quieter moments of tech-enabled dread, such as the subtle, terrifying hum when the heart takes control of an elevator or the chilling silence when a room's oxygen is remotely cut. In these moments, the sound tells the story of an invisible, godlike power more effectively than the visual effects do. The film's treatment of its secondary MI6 team members, Yang and Bailey, played by Jing Lucy and Paul Reddy, is a source of both its most effective emotional beat and a significant critique. The actors infuse their limited screen time with a charisma and warmth that is conspicuously absent from the lead character. Their easy camaraderie and a much-mentioned dancing scene are a fleeting glimpse of a more fun, loose, character-driven spy film. Their sudden execution by Parker is the cruelest and most shocking moment in the script. However, their deaths also feel like a cynical narrative shortcut, a way to add a veneer of emotional depth and stakes by fridging two characters the film didn't bother to fully develop. They are sacrificed for Parker's villain plot, not for Stone's emotional arc, which remains frustratingly stoic. Kia Doan's backstory is the emotional and political core around which the entire plot revolves. Her parents were killed in a clinical drug trial that was fraudulently fast-tracked, a crime of corporate negligence that killed dozens of innocents. The pharmaceutical billionaire responsible, Karch, then took the orphaned Kia in, not out of guilt, but to cultivate and exploit her nascent hacking talents. This origin story is a distillation of the film's most potent theme: the failure of traditional institutions, corporate, governmental, to deliver justice. Kia's quest is not for world domination, but for accountability. Her desire to expose the world's corruption using the heart is a dark, populist form of justice, and the film struggles to explain why her goal, in the abstract, is villainous. The character of the villainous billionaire Karch is a classic, almost cartoonish embodiment of corporate evil, and this is a problem for the film's more nuanced ambitions. He is presented as an untouchable elite who uses his wealth and power to literally get away with murder. While Kia's motivation is grounded in personal tragedy, Karch is a monolithic symbol, a one-dimensional dragon for her to slay. This simplifies the film's moral universe too cleanly. By making the source of Kia's trauma such an irredeemable monster, the script avoids a more challenging scenario where she might be targeting a more ambiguous or systemic injustice. He is a safe, universally hateable villain that justifies her extreme methods without forcing the audience to ask uncomfortable questions. The climactic resolution of Kia's arc involves a profound change of heart, a moral awakening triggered by witnessing the full, unhinged scope of Parker's cruelty. When she sees him use the heart to murder the King of Diamonds' entire family and attempt to suffocate Nomad and Jack, she realizes her alliance is with a man who has no limits. This pivot from motivated cyber-terrorist to reluctant hero is the most critical beat in the film's third act. It is a dramatic choice that argues for the existence of a fundamental human conscience that even the most tragic backstory cannot extinguish. Bhatt's performance in this sequence is her finest, a silent, terrified dawning of horror that communicates her character's entire reevaluation of her life's mission without a single line of dialogue. The film's final thematic statement is delivered not through action but through dialogue, in the prison scene where Stone offers Kia a new path. Stone's declaration: "The heart is an amazing tool, but that's all it is. If we always follow the odds, then we'll never do anything in spite of the odds," is the screenplay's thesis, worn on its sleeve. This line recontextualizes the entire narrative, arguing that the human capacity for impossible, irrational acts of courage is superior to any algorithm. It is a surprisingly humanistic ending for a film so focused on technology, a direct rejection of the very premise that powered its first two acts. Stone has learned that her heart of stone, her ability to suppress emotion for the mission, is a flaw, and that her true power lies in her empathy. The final sequence of the film is a transparent and highly functional franchise launcher, a closing scene designed to assemble a team and set a new status quo. Stone, having negotiated her terms with a reformed charter leadership, visits Kia in prison. The sliding of a playing card across a table, the Joker, is the film's final, perfectly framed image of intent. The Joker is the wild card, the unpredictable element that defies rules and odds. By naming her new recruit the Joker, Stone is codifying her entire philosophy into a team structure. This new unit, comprised of the Nine of Hearts, Stone, the Jack of Hearts, Schweifer, and the Joker, Bhatt, is engineered to be the human counterbalance to the machine, a trinity of heart, skill, and chaos. The film's costume design, overseen by Jill Taylor, is a subtle key to understanding Rachel Stone's dual identity. During her MI6 cover, she is dressed in unassuming, practical, and slightly frumpy tactical gear, often swamped in a bulky vest or hidden in the back of a van. The moment she is forced into action as a charter agent, this changes. Her silhouette becomes more streamlined, her colors shift to sleek blacks and powerful reds, and her movement is no longer inhibited. The most iconic look, a form-fitting, tactical outfit she wears during the final act, is a superhero costume in everything but name. This is not a coincidence. It is a visual signal that the Rachel Stone the world sees is a mask, and the formidable, stylish operative is the true identity underneath. The cinematography by George Steele struggles with an identity crisis between a desire for practical, location-based grit and a mandate for polished, CGI-enhanced spectacle. When the camera is capturing real locations, such as the ancient streets of Lisbon or the vast, bleak expanses of Iceland, the film has a genuine sense of scale and danger. These moments recall classic, pre-digital action cinema. However, these shots are frequently intercut with or replaced by digital composites that have a sleek, hyperreal sheen, a look common in high-end car commercials. This visual inconsistency is jarring and prevents the film from establishing a singular, cohesive visual language, constantly oscillating between a desire to be a gritty spy thriller and a fantastical comic book movie. The depiction of artificial intelligence in Heart of Stone stands in stark, deliberate contrast to the prevailing winds of contemporary sci-fi cinema. In the same summer that Mission: Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part 1 presented a rogue, omniscient AI as an existential Lovecraftian villain called the Entity, this film proposed a fundamentally benevolent, if fallible, AI assistant. The heart is never corrupted. It is a tool that is misused by humans. This position has been a focal point of critical debate, with some arguing it is a naive and dangerous simplification of the risks of autonomous systems. The film's ultimate message is not a Luddite warning against the machine, but a liberal humanist plea for better, more empathetic human masters over the powerful tools they have created. The notion of home and belonging is a poignant, underwritten theme that underscores Stone's journey. She is a foundling of the Charter, an operative with no mentioned family or past, living a life of perpetual false identities. Her time with the MI6 team, though based on a lie, was the closest she had come to a genuine human connection outside of the Charter's professional family. Parker's betrayal does not just take her teammates' lives. It obliterates the validity of that entire experience, poisoning the memory of the only normal life she had. Her choice to build a new team at the end, recruiting Kia and relying on Jack, is her first attempt to construct a chosen family on her own terms, one not assigned by the heart's calculations, but by her own judgment of character. The critical panning of the film upon its release on Netflix was anchored on an accusation of being fundamentally derivative. The reviews were littered with comparisons to The Mission, Impossible, James Bond, and Bourne franchises, with critics arguing that the film is a pale imitation rather than a fresh iteration. This argument has merit. The globetrotting, the tech-heavy MacGuffin, the double-crossing teammate, and the aloof, super-competent protagonist are all borrowed parts. The production company, Skydance, is also a key creative force behind The Mission, Impossible films, making the comparison an inescapable part of the film's critical reception. The film fails to carve out a unique identity, feeling more like an algorithmically generated composite of successful spy tropes than a story with an organic reason to exist. Despite its derivative structure, the film's thematic exploration of a woman choosing to trust her gut over a superintelligent AI is an interesting, if not fully realized, feminist recalibration of the spy genre. Rachel Stone's primary struggle is not with a physical male opponent, but with a patriarchal-seeming logical system that tells her the odds are impossible. Her ultimate victory comes not from being a better fighter than Parker, but from a more traditionally feminine trait of building relational trust, which proves more powerful than the heart's predictions. Kia's defection is not the result of a tactical operation, but of Stone's repeated acts of mercy. This is a subtle modern argument that emotional intelligence and collaboration are the true antidotes to the cold, isolating logic of both the heart and toxic masculine revenge. The action choreography in the finale, specifically the hand-to-hand combat between Stone and Parker, is designed to be a raw, inelegant counterpoint to the earlier, more technology-assisted sequences. There are no hacking tricks, no probability overlays, just two highly trained operatives trying to kill each other in a confined space. This is the film explicitly rejecting the heart's world of perfect, calculated outcomes for a world of pain, luck, and sheer force of will. Every punch thrown, every grunt of pain, is an assertion of the body over the machine. Stone's victory is not clean. It is brutal and desperate, culminating in her shooting an already incapacitated Parker. A dark act of finality that shows her evolution from an agent who follows a code to a survivor who makes permanent choices. Alia Bhatt's casting as Kia Doan was a significant event, marking her much-anticipated debut in English-language cinema. As one of the most famous and acclaimed actors in Bollywood, her presence brought a pre-existing star power and a significant new audience segment to the film. Netflix's model relies on this type of globally calculated casting, and Bhatt's performance was widely considered to be the film's saving grace. She navigates the switch from a Hindi-language film industry to a Hollywood production with complete command, bringing a depth of vulnerability and seething resentment to what could have been a cliché hacker role. Her character provides the cultural and emotional texture that the rest of the film's cool, Western-centric aesthetic often lacks. The final image of the film, Stone, Jack, and Kia walking away from their first mission as a new team, is a direct callback to the iconic final shots of countless ensemble heist and spy films. It is a promise of a more dynamic, character-driven future. The dynamic is now perfectly set. The experienced leader with newfound wisdom, the goofy tech wizard, and the unpredictable reformed wild card. This trio feels more like the crew of a fast-paced TV series pilot than the end of a film. The scene is designed to make the viewer feel that the real story is about to begin, a narrative tease that admits the preceding 2 hours have essentially been a lengthy, expensive origin story to put the final, more interesting team in place for hypothetical future installments that may or may not be greenlit. Conclusion. Heart of Stone is a film that perfectly encapsulates the modern Netflix blockbuster paradox. It is a globally sourced, impeccably produced, and entirely watchable piece of content that is simultaneously a deeply derivative and dramatically hollow experience. It assembles a superb cast, places them in beautiful locations, and builds its set pieces around a genuinely compelling philosophical debate about the nature of fate and technology. Yet, it fails to synthesize these elements into something that feels new or emotionally resonant. It is a film at war with itself, a would-be franchise starter that is too busy mimicking its betters to discover a voice of its own, leaving the audience with the distinct feeling of having seen it all done before, and often done better. Heart of Stone, a 2023 spy action thriller directed by Tom Harper, functions as a fascinating case study in the modern mechanics of globalized content creation. where a film is engineered less as a singular artistic statement and more as a meticulously calculated product designed to appeal to a worldwide streaming audience, and this foundational intent shapes every facet of its construction, from its diverse international casting to its succession of recognizable, tourist-friendly locations. And it is this very calculation, this algorithmic approach to spectacle, that becomes both the film's primary commercial asset and the source of its most profound artistic limitations, a tension that plays out across its entire runtime. The film's opening scene in the Italian Alps is a masterclass in establishing a false protagonist and a false genre, presenting a crackling radio play of military precision and playful banter among the MI6 team that feels like the start of a more traditional ensemble spy film, perhaps one directed by Guy Ritchie, and this deliberate, extended feint serves a crucial narrative purpose, lulling the audience into a state of comfortable familiarity with the tropes of a techno-thriller before the sudden, shocking eruption of Rachel Stone's true capabilities tears a hole in that familiar fabric, revealing the science fiction-infused reality of the charter that was hidden underneath all along. Gal Gadot's performance as Rachel Stone can be best understood not as a lack of emotion, but as a deeply internalized portrayal of a woman who has been psychologically conditioned to suppress her own humanity for the sake of a mission. A person whose very identity has been a fluid, modular construct for so long that the authentic self has become a distant, inaccessible memory, and the moments when this mask slips, such as her subtle, pained reaction to the death of her cat or the flicker of warmth when she talks about her fabricated childhood, are not signs of bad acting, but precisely calibrated glimpses into a soul that has been systematically frozen by the demands of a life lived entirely in the shadows of data and probabilities. Jamie Dornan's Parker is a villain created by the military-industrial complex's disposable regard for human life, a man whose heroism was punished, whose loyalty was rewarded with a targeted drone strike, and whose survival became a permanent, festering scar on the conscience of both MI6 and the Charter. And Dornan's smartest choice is to play the pre-revelation Parker not as a hidden monster, but as a genuinely good, weary leader, a man whose camaraderie with his team is real, which makes his subsequent execution-style murders of Young and Bailey not a cartoonish act of villainy, but a horrifying, irreversible severing of his own humanity, a crossing of a line that he can never uncross. The character of Kia Doan, brought to life with a compelling mix of fragility and ferocity by Alia Bhatt, represents the film's most potent political argument. The idea that the true global threat is not the rogue hacker or the stateless terrorist, but the untouchable, billionaire-class corporate predator who can kill with impunity, shielded by legal teams and bought politicians. And Kia's entire life is a monument to this systemic failure, her prodigious skills born from a childhood tragedy that a corrupt pharmaceutical CEO orchestrated and then attempted to launder by adopting the orphan daughter of his own victims. A perversion of care that is more chilling than any traditional supervillain plot. The heart as a narrative device is a profoundly brilliant MacGuffin precisely because it is not an object to be retrieved, but a system to be interpreted, a digital oracle whose prophecies are only as moral as the humans who ask the questions and pull the triggers. And the film's philosophical wager is that a perfectly logical system, untainted by human emotion, will inevitably produce immoral outcomes because morality itself is an illogical, emotional construct rooted in the irrational belief that a single life holds an infinite, unquantifiable value that no algorithm can ever compute. The Lisbon car chase, with its narrow, winding, cobblestone streets and its vertiginous staircases, is a sequence that almost touches the greatness of the genre's best, a tactile and kinetic ballet of screeching tires and shattering market stalls that seems to understand that the best action scenes are a form of dance, a choreographed dialogue between the human body, a machine, and a hostile environment. Yet the scene is repeatedly undermined by moments of obvious digital augmentation where Gadot's face is too cleanly composited onto a stunt double's body, a visual disconnect that yanks the audience out of the immediacy of the danger and reminds them they are watching a product constructed on a computer. Sophie Okonedo's Nomad is the film's quiet, steadfast moral center, a woman who has risen to the highest echelon of a shadowy, unaccountable organization and managed to retain a core of decency and empathy. And her scenes are a clinic in commanding a room through stillness and a quiet, unshakable authority, making her apparent death by suffocation, trapped in a room while Parker slowly drains the oxygen. A genuinely distressing sequence because Okonedo has made us believe in the steel and soul of this character with so few brushstrokes. The visual representation of the heart's interface, that shimmering, translucent augmented reality overlay that paints probability cones and threat vectors across the real world, is a clever diegetic solution to the classic cinematic problem of making a non-corporeal intelligence visible. But it also functions as a visual cage, a constant reminder that Rachel Stone's reality is mediated, edited, and directed by a disembodied voice and a stream of data that brackets her field of vision, symbolizing her lack of true autonomy, even as she is engaged in the most physically autonomous acts of violence. The film's treatment of its central double cross, where Parker executes Young and Bailey in a cold, confined space, is a scene that borrows its grammar and its gut-punch impact from the great mole reveals of spy cinema, from The Departed's elevator to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy's silent, devastating finale. And while it does not reach those heights, it successfully reorients the entire narrative in a single, brutal minute, transforming the film from a chase movie into a revenge tragedy and retroactively charging every one of Parker's earlier smiles and encouragements with a sinister, manipulative energy. The ethical architecture of the Charter is a fascinating, underexplored element of the film's world-building, an organization that has appointed itself the guardian of global stability without any democratic mandate, electoral oversight, or public accountability, operating on a pure, utilitarian logic that would be monstrous if applied to a real-world government. And the film's ultimate rejection of the heart's predictive authority is simultaneously a rejection of this entire technocratic, anti-democratic mode of governance, an argument that a world run by an enlightened, unaccountable priesthood of data-driven sages is a dystopia, no matter how benevolent its intentions. Glenn Close's cameo as the King of Diamonds is a spectral presence, a fleeting apparition of immense talent in a role that feels like it was edited down from a more substantial part, and her character's sudden, brutal death in a crashing elevator, a murder that extends to her innocent family members, is the moment where Parker's revenge plot tips from a targeted, principled if monstrous campaign against a specific injustice into an indiscriminate, generational blood feud that consumes the innocent along with the guilty, revealing him not as a tragic anti-hero, but as a monster who has become the very thing he swore to destroy. B.D. Wong's single, electrifying scene, a video call where a captured king of clubs is forced to confess his past sin to the vengeful Parker, is the film's most taut and dramatically pure moment. A two-hander played across a digital divide where Wong's terrified, calculating eyes and Parker's cold, righteous fury create a pressure cooker of guilt, accusation, and the terrible intimacy of a wrong that has festered for decades. A scene that hints at a much darker, more psychological thriller that the film, in its commitment to globetrotting action, does not allow itself to become. The screenplay's approach to artificial intelligence is, upon close analysis, not confused but dialectical, presenting a thesis of pure, benevolent logic via the heart, an antithesis of human corruption and misuse via Parker, and a synthesis in Stone's final position, which is that the tool must be stripped of its executive authority and returned to its proper place as an advisor, a powerful but ultimately subordinate partner to a human conscience that must make the final, fallible, beautiful, and terrible choice, and this is a genuinely moderate, liberal humanist position on AI governance that is far more nuanced than critics gave it credit for. Matthias Schweifer's Jack of Hearts is the character who undergoes the most profound, if understated, transformation, beginning the film as a true believer, a cheerful, nervous priest of the digital temple who has absolute faith in the heart's calculations and his own place within its grand design, and ending the film as a chastened but liberated man, forced to operate without his God, to make decisions based on his own wit and his trust in his human teammates, a loss of faith that is also a gain of self, a spiritual crisis resolved not in a grand speech but in the quiet, trembling competence he finds within himself during the final act. The film's Icelandic bunker, the site of the final confrontation, is a location that speaks in the language of cold, hard, unforgiving modernism, a maze of concrete, steel, and humming server racks that is the architectural negation of the warm, chaotic, human-scaled cities where the film's best action takes place. And the final fight between Stone and Parker in this sterile environment is a regression to a more primal form of conflict, a fist fight in a server room that is the physical manifestation of the film's central debate, two sweating, bleeding, desperate human bodies wrestling for control of a godlike machine that hums along, indifferent to their suffering. The film's marketing heavily featured Gal Gadot's status as a producer, And this is a significant piece of paratextual information that frames the entire project as a star-driven vehicle engineered to give Gadot a potential post-Wonder Woman franchise, a Tom Cruise-style action hero brand that she can own and develop. And this ambition is legible in every frame. From the careful way she is lit and costumed to the script's insistence on her character's moral correctness, a protective image. Managing layer that prevents the character from ever being truly challenged, truly broken, or truly morally compromised in a way that a more artistically risky film might dare. The death of the cat, an unnamed, innocent creature that Parker dispatches with chilling casualness, is a small, easily missed detail that is the truest indicator of his complete moral dissolution. A symbolic act of cruelty that serves no tactical purpose, advances no plot, and is done purely for the psychological torture of Stone. And this moment of petty, spiteful violence against a defenseless animal is the film's way of telling the audience, without a word of dialogue, that the man they once trusted is not a wounded soldier seeking justice, but a sadist who has learned to enjoy the infliction of pain. Kia Doan's technological prowess is not presented as magical or innate, but as a skill forged in a crucible of grief and exploited by a predatory mentor, a realistic and grounded depiction of how prodigious talent, especially in marginalized individuals, is so often identified and weaponized by those with power and resources. And her journey in the film is a reclamation of her own agency, a refusal to be a weapon in either Parker's war or Karch's corporate machine, a choice to use her skills for something she has chosen, a team she has chosen, and a future she is building, not one that was built for her by a man. The supporting team of the Charter, glimpsed briefly in a boardroom scene, is a tableau of the global elite, a collection of grave-faced, expensively dressed men and women from various nations who are the silent, consenting audience to the orders of the kings. And this fleeting image is a potent political cartoon, a suggestion that the conspiracy of global stability is not a hidden cabal of lizard people, but a far more banal and terrifying thing. A management consultancy of power, a board of directors for the world whose meetings are all off the books. The film's use of sound during the moment when Parker takes control of the heart is a brilliant piece of audio storytelling, as the usual helpful, almost maternal voice of the AI is replaced by a chilling silence, and then a new, cold, impersonal tone, a modulation that signals, in an instant, that the benevolent God has been usurped and the universe has become a hostile, surveilled prison. A shift that is felt in the gut before it is processed by the brain. Rachel Stone's decision to visit Kia in prison, to look her in the eye and offer her a card, is the first moment in the entire film where Stone makes a choice that is purely based on her own instinct. A decision that has no probability model backing it, no charter doctrine authorizing it, and no heart prediction advising it, and it is the culmination of her arc. A leap of faith that is the antithesis of everything her organization stands for, an act of grace that proves she has finally learned to lead not with a heart of stone, but with a heart of flesh. The film's villain problem is encapsulated in the character of the pharmaceutical billionaire, a figure so thinly drawn and so cartoonishly evil that he drains dramatic tension from the far more interesting moral gray areas the film is trying to explore, and by making the ultimate source of Kia's pain such a one-dimensional monster. The script inadvertently lets the corrupt system off the hook, reducing a systemic evil to a single bad apple whose removal, the film implies, solves the underlying injustice. The costumes in the film undergo a subtle but significant evolution, with Rachel Stone's wardrobe transitioning from the boxy, concealing, shapeless layers of her MI6 cover identity to the streamlined, flexible, armor-like tactical gear of her true self. A shedding of a false skin that is a classic superhero trope, but executed with a grounded, practical sensibility that makes the change feel less like a magical girl transformation and more like a professional finally being allowed to wear the tools of her actual trade. The editing of the action sequences, particularly the hand-to-hand combat, suffers from a slight case of what might be called post-born chaos, with a few too many rapid cuts that obscure the spatial geography of the fight. A style that is clearly intended to convey frenetic energy, but which often reads as a lack of confidence in the performer's ability to sell the choreography in a wider, longer take. A pity because the glimpses of the fight design we do see suggest a brutal, efficient style that would have benefited from a more classical, legible presentation. The film's geopolitical landscape is a deliberately vague, post-ideological world where the old Cold War binaries have collapsed, and the true conflict is between a globalist, technocratic order and a chaotic insurgency of personal vendettas and stateless actors. A map of the world that feels less like a specific prediction of the future, and more like a mirror of the present anxieties of a globalized elite who fear that the old rules no longer apply and the new game has no rules at all. The theme of mentorship is a recurring and broken motif in the film, with every mentor-mentee relationship being a site of trauma or betrayal, from Parker's initial mentorship of the rookie Stone, which is a lie, to Karch's exploitative mentorship of Kia, which is a crime, to the Charter's mentorship of Stone, which is a form of indoctrination. And Stone's final act of becoming a mentor to Kia is an attempt to break this cycle, to forge a relationship based on honesty, shared trauma, and a mutual commitment to a future they are building together, not one they have inherited. The film's humor, largely delivered through Matthias Schweifer's Jack, is a carefully calibrated pressure release valve, a series of small, self-deprecating jokes and panicked reactions that punctuate the relentless tension without ever undercutting the stakes. And Jack's role as the comic relief is also a clever narrative function, as his very lightness and vulnerability make him the character the audience most fears for. The canary in the coal mine of the film's escalating violence. The color palette of the film is a study in cold blues, sterile whites, and deep blacks, a digital, desaturated look that is common in modern action cinema, and which gives the entire film a sleek, professional, slightly inhuman sheen. A visual aesthetic that perfectly matches the world of the Charter, but which also robs the film of any tactile warmth, any sense of a lived-in, messy, colorful human world existing outside the frames of the mission. The film's treatment of Rachel Stone's physicality is notably desexualized, a conscious choice that positions her as a pure action hero whose body is a weapon and a tool, never an object of the male gaze. And this is a refreshing departure from the long, problematic history of the female spy in cinema, where sexuality was often the primary weapon. But it also contributes to the sense that the character is slightly robotic, a being of pure function whose physical existence is entirely about combat and never about pleasure, comfort, or sensual connection. The inclusion of a scene where the MI6 team dances and socializes, a moment of pure character texture that is often lost in the relentless plot mechanics of the genre, is a smart screenwriting choice that pays off tragically, as the memory of their easy, joyful camaraderie makes their subsequent, brutal executions exponentially more painful. A textbook example of how to create an emotional stake in a character's survival by first showing them as a full, joyful human being. The film's production design, particularly the creation of the Heart server room in the Iceland bunker, is a gorgeous piece of sci-fi minimalism, a cathedral of data where the pulsing, silent columns of servers are arranged like the pillars of a futuristic temple, and the blue, cold light that bathes the scene gives the final confrontation a religious, almost mythical quality. A battle for the soul of the world fought in the high-tech shrine of its new god. The character of the King of Spades, the sole surviving member of the Charter's original leadership by the film's end, is a narrative loose thread left deliberately dangling, a silent, inscrutable figure who watches Stone's reformation of the organization with an unreadable expression, a seed of potential conflict planted for a sequel where the old guard of technocratic control might not so easily cede power to Stone's new, more humanistic, more chaotic vision of what a peacekeeping force should be. The film's theme of identity theft, the literal stealing of a life and its replacement with a manufactured legend, is the dark mirror of Stone's own profession. A spy whose job is to create a beautiful, convincing lie and live inside it, and Kia's backstory, where her own identity was stolen by the man who killed her family, is a traumatic perversion of the same skill set. A reminder that the line between a deep-cover operative and a psychological victim is disturbingly thin. The Lisbon safe house where the team regroups is a classic spy movie location, a sun-drenched, slightly shabby apartment that represents a temporary, precarious sanctuary, and the scene inside, where a wounded team tends to their injuries and processes the chaos, is the film's last moment of quiet before the storm of Parker's betrayal. A final breath of normal, team-based spy craft before the genre is shattered by the double cross. The film's CGI, particularly in the skydiving sequence and the more outlandish vehicle stunts, is a constant source of friction with the otherwise grounded, practical aesthetic the film occasionally reaches for, and this inconsistency, the oscillation between a real Gal Gadot running on a real street and a digital Gal Gadot performing an impossible feat of physics, creates a cognitive dissonance that is the central visual failure of the film, a failure to commit to a single, unified language of action. The moral climax of the film is not the killing of Parker but the sparing of Karch, a choice that Kia makes, with Stone's support, to expose the billionaire to legal justice rather than executing him in his bunker. A rejection of Parker's philosophy of extrajudicial vengeance that solidifies the film's stance that true justice requires the rebuilding of systems, not their total destruction by a single vengeful gun. The film's final line, a quiet, confident reclamation of a phrase that was once used to dismiss her, is a small, perfect piece of character punctuation. A verbal sigil that signals the completion of a journey from a woman who was told to stay in the van to a woman who now commands the van, the mission, and her own destiny. A simple, satisfying, and emotionally resonant ending to a film that often struggled to find its emotional core. The influence of the mission. Impossible franchise on Heart of Stone extends beyond the surface level of stunts and gadgets to a deeper, structural borrowing. The idea of a small, morally flexible team of operatives working outside of governmental oversight to do what traditional agencies cannot. But where the IMF is a rogue, all-American enterprise, the Charter is a global, post-national entity. A shift that reflects the changing anxieties of a world where threats and heroes are no longer easily sorted by flag or allegiance. The film's use of on-screen text to identify locations, a classic globetrotting trope, is executed with a sleek, digital font that integrates seamlessly with the film's HUD-based visual language, a small design choice that maintains the immersion in a world where data and location are inextricably linked. And even the typography is a reminder that the characters are always being watched, tracked, and processed by the systems they serve or fight. The relationship between Stone and her MI6 team leader Parker, before the betrayal, is a fascinating study in a power dynamic built on a foundational lie, with Parker genuinely believing he is mentoring and protecting a less capable agent, and Stone playing that role to perfection. A performance that requires her to feign fear, uncertainty, and gratitude, emotions that, in her true identity, are trained out of her, making her MI6 persona a weirdly vulnerable, humanized version of herself that is both a mask and a kind of prison. The film's most radical and perhaps unintentional idea is that the villain's plan, to expose global corruption using an omniscient AI, is not inherently evil but is, in fact, a fantasy of radical transparency that many disenfranchised people might find appealing. And the film's failure to truly grapple with this, to explain why Parker's goal is worse than the current system of hidden crimes and untouchable elites, is the hole at the center of its moral argument, a hole it tries to paper over. By having Parker gratuitously murder a cat and a family. The geography of the film's final act, which moves from a sterile bunker to a crashing helicopter and finally to a quiet, snow-swept landscape, is a physical journey that mirrors the spiritual journey of the film, from the cold, hard logic of the machine, through the chaos and violence of a world out of balance, to a final, quiet, human-scale resolution where two women make a pact that will define a new future. A future the film has spent 2 hours arguing is better than the one an algorithm would choose. The film's deep, unspoken tragedy is the character of the King of Clubs, a man who made a monstrous, utilitarian decision in Chechnya, a decision that the heart probably calculated as optimal, and who has lived for years with the knowledge of what he did. A knowledge that has not made him a cackling villain, but a weary, frightened old man who knows, in his final moments, that the bill for his sin has finally come due. And his death is not a triumphant moment of justice, but a bleak, Pyrrhic confirmation that violence, once set in motion, never truly ends, it just waits. The film's opening and closing images form a deliberate, symmetrical diptych, a chaotic, multi-agent operation in the Alps opening the film, and a clean, focused, three-person team walking into a new mission closing it. A visual thesis about the move from a large, impersonal, system-dependent organization to a small, agile, trust-based family. An argument that the future of saving the world is not bigger data, but deeper bonds. The sound of the heart's voice, a calm, synthesized, gender-neutral tone, is a brilliant piece of audio branding that is instantly recognizable and deeply unsettling. A voice that is designed to be reassuring and authoritative, but which, when placed in Parker's control, becomes the cold, bureaucratic voice of a universe that has calculated the acceptable loss of your life and found it to be an acceptable price for a higher-order outcome. The film's legacy, regardless of its critical reception, will be as a significant data point in the evolution of the female-led action franchise, a serious, big-budget attempt to give a global star a signature role outside of an existing IP, and its success or failure, both critically and commercially, will be studied by studios deciding whether to greenlight the next 10 such projects, making it a more important film in the industry's history than its artistic merits might strictly warrant. The character of Rachel Stone is a meditation on the psychological cost of being a permanent outsider. A woman who has spent 2 years inside a MI6 team, forming bonds she knows to be temporary and fake, and the film subtly suggests that her rebellion against the heart's logic is partly motivated by a desperate, human need to make those bonds real, to retroactively justify the emotional investment she made in a cover identity, to prove to herself that she is not just a tool but a person capable of loyalty that defies the mission. The film's treatment of death, particularly the sudden, unglamorous execution of main characters, is a narrative strategy borrowed from the shock-driven storytelling of modern prestige television. A willingness to kill off likable, developed characters to signal that the stakes are real and no one is safe. But this strategy is a double-edged sword, as it can also breed a kind of narrative nihilism where the audience learns not to invest in any character, knowing they could be erased in the next scene for the sake of a cheap, fleeting shock. The visual storytelling during the scene where Parker reveals his betrayal is a masterclass in blocking and camera movement. As the entire team is arranged in a confined space, the camera slowly circles them, and the shift in Parker's posture, the deadening of his eyes, and the sudden, efficient violence that erupts from the stillness is a horrific, perfectly executed piece of cinema that changes the register of the entire film in an instant, a jump scare of the soul. The film's world-building, the creation of the Charter's history, hierarchy, and symbology, is incredibly dense and largely delivered through efficient, expository dialogue, a testament to a script that knows its genre well enough to trust its audience to keep up. But this density also leaves some of the more intriguing corners of this universe, like the internal politics of the Four Kings and the selection process for the playing card codenames, frustratingly unexplored in the rush to the next action beat. The relationship between artificial intelligence and love is an unspoken, haunting subtext of the film, as the heart can predict everything but cannot understand the irrational, self-sacrificing love that makes Rachel Stone defy its odds. The love that makes Kia betray her ally to save a woman she barely knows. The love for a dead team that fuels Parker's monstrous revenge. And the film argues, in its final, quiet moments, that this unquantifiable, illogical force is the only thing that can save a world that a cold, perfect logic has doomed. The film's final shot, before the credit roll, of the three-person team walking away from the audience and into the sun-drenched, uncertain distance of their next mission, is a perfect encapsulation of the film's ultimate fantasy. Not the fantasy of a perfectly controlled world run by a benevolent AI, but the much older, more human fantasy of found family, of a small group of broken, talented people who have chosen each other against all odds, walking into danger together because they have decided, against all logic and probability, that together they are stronger, and that a heart that can be broken is better than a heart of stone. The narrative architecture of Heart of Stone is built upon a foundation of carefully layered secrets, where each revelation peels back not just a plot point, but an entire genre convention. And this structural sophistication is the film's greatest, most underappreciated achievement. A Russian doll of spy tropes where the MI6 team is a cover for Stone, the Charter is a cover for the heart, and the heart itself is a cover for the ultimate truth the film wants to reveal, which is that no system, no matter how perfectly designed, can account for the chaotic, beautiful, terrifying unpredictability of a human being choosing to act not on probability but on principle. Gal Gadot's physical performance throughout the film is a language of its own, a dialect of movement that communicates her character's duality more effectively than any line of dialogue ever could, as she shifts from the hunched, hesitant, self-diminishing posture of the MI6 tech to the fluid, expansive, almost predatory grace of the Charter agent. A transformation that is so complete and so instantaneous that it functions as a visual special effect, a morphing of the body that tells the audience, before any punch is thrown, that they are now watching a fundamentally different person. The film's treatment of artificial intelligence as a mirror rather than a monster is its most philosophically sophisticated move, presenting the heart not as a sentient villain with its own agenda, but as a perfectly reflective surface that shows its users exactly what they already are. And when Parker wields it, it becomes an instrument of surgical, indiscriminate death. But when Stone consults it, it becomes a tool of preservation, proving that the moral quality of a technology is never inherent but always contingent on the hands and hearts of those who control it. The casting of Alia Bhatt as Kia Doan was a decision that brought not just star power from the world's largest film industry, but a whole new register of emotional performance to the film. A style of acting rooted in a melodramatic tradition that is unafraid of big, legible, emotionally transparent feelings, and this energy cuts through the cool, restrained, almost affectless demeanor of the European and American cast members like a warm knife, injecting the film with a pulse of raw, recognizable human pain that the script desperately needs. The film's geography is a map of the modern globalized world's power centers, moving from the old-world elegance of the Italian Alps to the tech-hub dynamism of Lisbon, from the desolate, otherworldly beauty of Iceland to the corporate globalist non-places of private bunkers and server farms, and each location is chosen not just for its cinematic beauty, but for its symbolic resonance. A travelogue of a world where power is no longer located in parliaments and palaces, but in server rooms and the unmarked, anonymous buildings where the real decisions are made. The character of Parker is a walking, talking indictment of the War on Terror's moral bankruptcy. A man who was forged in the black sites and extraordinary renditions of the post-9/11 era. A ghost soldier who did the unspeakable things his government asked of him, and was then erased when the political winds shifted. And his rage is not the rage of a madman, but the rage of a patriot who has realized that his country's love was always conditional, transactional, and ultimately for him and his men, withdrawn at the worst possible moment. The film's sound design during the charter's operations is a symphony of digital whispers, a soundscape of soft clicks, gentle chimes, and the ever-present, almost subaudible hum of the heart's processing, creating an auditory environment that is both soothing and deeply uncanny. The sound of a world where every phone call is heard, every security camera is an eye, and every locked door is a suggestion rather than a barrier. A sonic panopticon that the audience inhabits along with the characters. The relationship between Rachel Stone and her cat, a small, seemingly insignificant detail, is the emotional key that unlocks her entire character. Because the cat is the only relationship in her life that is not a mission, not a cover, not a professional obligation, but a simple, pure, uncomplicated bond of affection. And when Parker kills it, he does not just destroy a pet. He destroys the last remaining evidence that Rachel Stone, not the Nine of Hearts, not the MI6 tech, but the real, private, unguarded woman, actually exists. The film's action philosophy, when it is working at its best, is rooted in a principle of creative problem-solving rather than brute force. With Stone using her environment, her knowledge of the heart's predictive capabilities, and her understanding of human psychology to win fights that she should, by all physical logic, lose. And this is a refreshingly intellectual approach to action heroism that positions intelligence and adaptability, rather than pure physical strength, as the ultimate superpower. The Lisbon sequence, beyond its surface-level chaos, is a carefully constructed narrative about the cost of maintaining a cover. As Stone is forced to watch her teammates be endangered, to see Young and Bailey nearly die, all while calculating in real time whether revealing her true identity to save them is worth the strategic loss. And this internal calculus, played out entirely on Gadot's face while the action rages around her, is a more compelling drama than any of the explosions or gunfire that punctuate it. The film's color grading undergoes a subtle but meaningful shift as the narrative progresses, beginning with the crisp, clean, almost antiseptic blues and whites of the charter's world, moving through the warm, golden, human tones of the MI6 team's camaraderie, and descending finally into the harsh, desaturated, almost monochromatic palette of the Icelandic finale, a visual journey from a world of clear, digital certainty to a world of murky, human moral ambiguity. Sophie Okonedo's Nomad is the character who most clearly embodies the tragic contradiction at the heart of the charter, a woman of profound empathy and moral seriousness who has dedicated her life to an organization that systematically devalues individual human life in favor of statistical outcomes, and her performance is a study in the quiet daily, soul-eroding compromises that such a position requires, the small surrenders of conscience that accumulate over a career until the person you were is buried under the operative you became. The film's treatment of Kia's hacking skills avoids the usual Hollywood nonsense of furious typing and flashing screens, instead presenting her work as a form of deep, intuitive understanding, a psychological warfare that is as much about knowing her target's weaknesses and desires as it is about writing code. And this portrayal respects both the audience's intelligence and the reality that the most dangerous hackers are not just technicians, but artists of human manipulation. The betrayal sequence in the cramped room, lit with a sickly fluorescent pallor that makes everyone look already dead, is a scene that operates according to the logic of a horror film rather than an action movie, building dread through stillness and silence before the sudden, irreversible violence erupts. And the decision to have Parker kill his former teammates not with a dramatic monologue, but with a few quiet, almost apologetic words makes the act infinitely more chilling and more real. The film's philosophical argument with itself about the nature of predestination versus free will is externalized in the visual motif of the heart's probability percentages, numbers that appear on screen to tell Stone and the audience that a course of action is impossible, numbers that she then proceeds to defy through sheer, stubborn, human will. And each time she does this, the film is making a small, quiet argument for the existence of a space beyond calculation, a space where human freedom actually lives. The character of Jack of Hearts, in his role as the constant voice in Stone's ear, functions as a kind of Greek chorus, a one-man audience surrogate who verbalizes the panic, the hope, and the moral confusion that the stoic Stone cannot express. And his arc from a man who believes completely in the system to a man who has seen the system fail and has chosen to believe in his friends instead is the arc the film hopes its own audience will travel. The film's use of surveillance imagery, the grainy, high-angle, omnipresent footage from security cameras and satellites that the heart can access at will, creates a persistent visual reminder that in the world of Heart of Stone, privacy is a fiction and every action is being recorded, analyzed, and judged by a system that never blinks, never sleeps, and never forgets. A panopticon aesthetic that is the true visual signature of the film. The decision to make the primary antagonist not a foreign power or a terrorist organization, but a wronged insider with a legitimate grievance was a bold narrative choice that forces the audience into an uncomfortable position. Because Parker's critique of the Charter is largely correct, his pain is real, and his demand for accountability is just. And the film must therefore work very hard to make his methods so monstrous that we can comfortably root for his destruction without having to dismiss his argument. The film's climax, a fistfight in a server room, is a deliberately primitive, almost medieval resolution to a conflict that has been fought with the most advanced technology on Earth. A choice that visually argues that when all the systems fail, when the satellites are blind and the AI is offline, the only thing left is the human body, the human will, and the human capacity for violence. A return to a state of nature that the entire edifice of the Charter was designed to prevent. Rachel Stone's negotiation with the surviving Charter leadership at the film's end is a masterclass in soft power. A scene where she does not threaten or demand, but simply, calmly, and irrevocably states the conditions under which she will continue to serve, and this moment of quiet, firm, ethical leadership is the true culmination of her character arc. The moment she stops being a weapon and becomes a leader, a person who shapes the system rather than being shaped by it. The film's score, composed by Henry Jackman, is a character in its own right, a pulsing, electronic heartbeat that races during the action sequences and drops into a mournful, almost liturgical quiet during the moments of loss and reflection. And the main theme, with its ascending, striving melody that never quite resolves, is a perfect musical encapsulation of the film's central tension between the desire for perfect, machine-like order and the messy, unresolved, human reality that keeps breaking through. The production design of the Charter's various safe houses and command centers, with their clean lines, Scandinavian furniture, and ubiquitous screens displaying flowing streams of data, creates a visual language of benevolent, rational, hypermodern power that is seductive in its order and cleanliness. A world where everything has its place and every problem has a solution. A world that the film ultimately argues is a beautiful, dangerous lie. The film's treatment of the MI6 team's dynamic before the betrayal is a masterclass in efficient characterization, using small, seemingly throwaway moments of banter, shared jokes, and wordless glances to build a sense of a lived-in, long-standing professional family. And the efficiency of this characterization makes their sudden deaths feel not like the loss of minor characters, but like the destruction of an entire world, a tragedy that the film carries with it through every subsequent scene. The character of the Joker, as introduced in the final scene, is a symbol of the film's ultimate philosophical position, because the Joker is the card that does not belong to any suit, that follows no predictable rules, that can be the highest value or the lowest depending entirely on context, and by naming Kia the Joker, Stone is declaring that her new team will be built not on rigid hierarchy and predictable probabilities, but on the very human capacity for surprise, adaptation, and creative chaos. The film's cinematography in the quiet moments, the scenes between the action set pieces, often employs a shallow depth of field that isolates characters in a sea of blur, a visual technique that communicates their profound isolation even when they are surrounded by allies and technology, and this persistent visual motif of the lone, sharp figure in a soft, unknowable world is the truest image of the spy's existential condition that the film has to offer. The ethical debate at the film's core is not between good and evil, but between two competing visions of the good, with the Charter representing a utilitarian ethics of calculated outcomes and Stone representing a deontological ethics of inviolable principles, and the film's ultimate argument, that principles must constrain calculation, or else the calculation will consume everything, is a serious philosophical position delivered through the unlikely medium of a Netflix action movie. The film's use of water imagery, from the snow and ice of the Alps and Iceland to the rain-slicked streets of Lisbon, creates a persistent association between the heart's cold, crystalline logic and the element of frozen water, while human emotion, warmth, and connection are consistently associated with fire, light, and the sun-drenched final scene, an elemental symbolism that operates at a subconscious level throughout the film. The character of Kia Doan's moral journey is a refutation of the idea that people are irredeemable, a slow, painful, and believable pivot from a woman consumed by revenge to a woman who chooses to break the cycle of violence. And this arc is the emotional core of the film's third act, the proof of concept for Stone's argument that human beings can change, can surprise, can defy the odds that their own history has calculated for them. The film's action choreography in the motorcycle chase through Iceland is a beautiful example of using a hostile environment as an active participant in the scene, with the ice, the wind, and the vast, featureless white landscape becoming obstacles and weapons in their own right. A sequence that understands that the most memorable action scenes are not just about what the characters do, but about the world that is pushing back against them. The silence that follows Parker's final death is a profound, almost unbearable absence of sound, a vacuum where the audience and the characters are given space to feel the full weight of what has just happened. And this silence is the film's most mature and restrained choice. A refusal to punctuate the death of its villain with a triumphant musical sting or a witty one-liner, but instead a quiet, somber acknowledgement that killing, even killing a monster, is a tragedy. The film's subtext about the gig economy of modern intelligence work, where operatives like Parker are disposable contractors who can be erased when they become inconvenient, is a sharp, contemporary political observation that grounds the film's more fantastical elements in a recognizable, cynical reality. A world where even the people who save the world are just precarious laborers whose benefits do not include being rescued. The relationship between technology and intimacy is a recurring melancholic motif, with the film constantly showing characters who are more comfortable communicating through screens, earpieces, and data streams than they are in face-to-face, unmediated human contact, and the final image of the three-person team walking together, in the same physical space, looking at each other, is a quiet victory for the human over the digital, a choice to be present. The film's title, Heart of Stone, is a triple pun that operates on multiple levels, referring to Rachel Stone, the protagonist, to the heart, the AI that is the center of the plot, and to the emotional condition of a person who has been so traumatized and so professionalized that they can no longer feel. And the film's narrative is the story of how all three of these hearts, the person, the machine, and the metaphor, are transformed by the end of the story into something softer, warmer, and more alive. The casting of Glenn Close in a role that is essentially an extended cameo is a narrative strategy that borrows from the horror genre's tradition of killing off a famous actor early to establish the stakes. Because when a performer of Close's stature and gravitas is dispatched so suddenly and so brutally, the audience's sense of safety is shattered, and the film's promise that no one is protected becomes viscerally, terrifyingly real. The film's depiction of the Charter's leadership, the Four Kings as a gerontocracy of cold old power, is a visual argument that the institutions of global stability are not just unaccountable, but also stagnant, brittle, and out of touch, and Stone's quiet, respectful but firm usurpation of their authority at the film's end is a generational transfer of power, a suggestion that the future of peacekeeping must be younger, more diverse, and more emotionally intelligent. The use of the playing card suit of hearts for the protagonists is a symbolic choice that the film wears on its sleeve, a declaration that this organization, despite its flaws, is fundamentally motivated by love, by a desire to protect the world, and Parker's betrayal is so devastating precisely because it corrupts this symbol, turning a suit that represents care and compassion into a mark of death, a perversion that Stone must redeem by the film's end. The film's editing rhythm during the final confrontation is noticeably slower, more deliberate, and more brutal than in the earlier action sequences, with each punch landing with a sickening, weighty thud and each moment of stillness holding for just a beat longer than is comfortable. A shift in pacing that signals to the audience that we have left the realm of spectacular entertainment and entered a space of genuine, costly, human violence. The character of Rachel Stone is a feminist action hero not because she can fight as well as a man, but because her ultimate victory comes from a set of skills that are traditionally coded as feminine: empathy, communication, the ability to build trust, and the willingness to forgive. And the film argues, through its plot mechanics, that these skills are not weaknesses in the world of espionage, but are, in fact, the only things that can solve the problems that violence and logic have created. The film's final philosophical position, that the tool must serve the human and not the other way around, is a moderate, centrist, and profoundly comforting resolution to the AI panic that pervades contemporary culture, an argument that we do not need to destroy our technological creations, but we do need to remember that they are creations, not gods, and that the responsibility for moral choice can never be outsourced to an algorithm, no matter how perfect its calculations may seem. The legacy of Heart of Stone, should the planned franchise materialize, will be as the origin story of a different kind of spy team, one built not on the cold, predictive logic of an all-seeing machine, but on the messy, unpredictable, and infinitely more interesting foundation of three broken people who chose to trust each other. And this is a premise that holds genuine promise, a promise that the film, in its final, hopeful frames, seems to finally believe it can fulfill. The pre-credits sequence of Heart of Stone operates as a short film unto itself, a tightly wound, 15-minute thriller that introduces every major character in their false configuration, establishes the visual language of the film, and ends on a cliffhanger that retroactively changes the meaning of every interaction the audience has just witnessed. A narrative magic trick so smoothly executed that its structural elegance only becomes apparent on a second viewing, when the viewer can see all the invisible seams that were carefully hidden in plain sight. The film's understanding of modern espionage as a data-driven enterprise rather than a gun-and-gadget playground is one of its most quietly radical innovations, presenting a world where the most dangerous weapon is not a pistol with a silencer, but a query typed into a search bar, where the most secure fortress can be breached not with explosives, but with a well-crafted phishing email, and this vision of intelligence work, while less immediately cinematic than the Bond model, feels far more relevant to the actual 21st century. Gal Gadot's face, often criticized for its perceived inexpressiveness, is here deployed as a strategic asset, a mask of serene, classical beauty that reveals nothing, betrays nothing, and invites the projections of everyone around her. And the film is smart enough to understand that this quality, which can be a limitation in dramatic roles, is a superpower in a spy thriller where the protagonist's primary job is to be unreadable, a blank screen onto which allies and enemies alike write their own assumptions. The film's treatment of the Alps mission as a piece of misdirection extends even to its color palette, which is dominated by crisp, clean whites and blues that suggest clarity, transparency, and the unambiguous moral universe of a traditional action movie, a visual promise of simplicity that the film will spend its remaining runtime systematically dismantling, revealing the murky grays and deep blacks that lurk beneath the pristine surface of the snow. The character of Bailey, played with a weary, sardonic warmth by Paul Reddy, is the film's most effective piece of emotional sleight of hand, a supporting character so charmingly ordinary, so reassuringly competent, and so clearly designed to be the comic relief who survives to the final reel that his sudden, brutal death is not just a plot twist but a breach of contract with the audience, a declaration that the familiar rules of this genre no longer apply. The film's depiction of the Charter's recruitment and training process, hinted at in fragments of dialogue and flashback, paints a picture of an organization that does not hire its operatives so much as it adopts them, finding broken, lost, or disaffected individuals with exceptional talents and offering them not just a job, but a purpose, a family, and a new identity, a process that is as much a rescue as it is a recruitment, and as much an indoctrination as it is a rescue. The heart's predictive capability, which can forecast events with dead-point accuracy, is a narrative device that should, by all rights, eliminate dramatic tension from the film, since a protagonist guided by a near-omniscient AI should be effectively invincible. And the film's solution to this problem is elegant, introducing an antagonist who knows the system intimately, who can anticipate its anticipations, and who has engineered a scenario where the heart's perfect logic leads it, step by step, into a perfectly logical trap. The Lisbon safe house scene, where the wounded and exhausted MI6 team tends to its injuries and processes the revelation of Stone's true identity, is the film's most emotionally complex sequence, a pressure cooker of shock, betrayal, relief, and confusion where four actors are asked to play for different, simultaneous, and contradictory reactions to the same information. And the scene's power lies in its refusal to resolve these tensions quickly, allowing the discomfort to sit and fester and curdle. The film's use of the color red is a subtle but persistent visual motif, appearing first in the playing card of the Nine of Hearts, then in the blood that stains the snow after the opening mission, then in the emergency lights of the crashing elevator, and finally in the warm, life-affirming tones of the final scene. A thread of color that traces the film's emotional journey from the abstract symbol of belonging, through the reality of violence and sacrifice, to the hard-won, human warmth of the conclusion. The character of the King of Clubs, as portrayed by B.D. Wong, is a study in the banality of bureaucratic evil, a man who made a decision that killed innocent people not out of malice or ideology, but out of a cold, professional calculation that it was the optimal outcome, and his genuine, bewildered terror when confronted with the consequences of that decision is not the terror of a villain caught, but the terror of an administrator who has just realized that his spreadsheets had human names. The film's action sequences are structured as a series of escalating dares, each set piece designed to top the previous one in scale, danger, and improbability, a classic blockbuster architecture that moves from the intimate peril of the Alps foot chase to the vehicular mayhem of Lisbon to the high-tech, high-altitude spectacle of the Iceland finale, a ramp of increasing intensity that is the film's primary engine of momentum. The relationship between Kia and her adoptive father, the pharmaceutical billionaire Karch, is a dark fairy tale of exploitation disguised as benevolence, a man who destroyed her family and then rebuilt himself as her savior. A lie so profound and so psychologically devastating that it has turned Kia into a person who trusts no one, believes in nothing, and has dedicated her life to the cold, digital certainty of code because the warm, human world of relationships has only ever been a weapon used against her. The film's sound design during the scene where Parker takes control of the heart and begins systematically murdering the charter leadership is a symphony of technological horror, with each death announced not by a gunshot, but by a soft, polite chime, a calm, synthesized voice confirming the completion of a task, and the distant, muffled sound of destruction happening somewhere else. A sonic dissociation that makes the violence feel both omnipresent and unreal. The character of Nomad, the King of Hearts, is the moral canary in the coal mine of the Charter, the leader who most clearly articulates the organization's ideals and the leader who is most visibly pained by its compromises and her near-death experience, slowly suffocating while her former protégé watches through a screen, is a crucifixion that the film forces its audience to endure in real time, a martyrdom for the sins of the system she served. The film's depiction of technology is refreshingly free of the usual Hollywood technophobia, presenting hacking, surveillance, and artificial intelligence not as inherently sinister forces, but as tools whose moral valence depends entirely on their application. A nuanced position that allows the film to critique the misuse of technology without descending into a reactionary Luddism that would be both philosophically lazy and practically useless as a guide to the actual world we inhabit. The geography of the final bunker, with its concentric circles of security and its central sanctum-like server room, is a physical representation of the film's central argument, which is that at the heart of every system of perfect rational control, there is a void, an empty space where the calculations stop and a choice must be made, and the final fight takes place in that void, in the space beyond prediction, where the algorithm has no answer and a human being must decide. The film's treatment of Stone's backstory, or rather its conspicuous absence, is a bold narrative choice that refuses the easy emotional shortcut of a traumatic childhood or a fridged loved one, presenting instead a protagonist who is a professional, a woman whose motivations are rooted in her present commitments rather than her past wounds. A characterization that is both refreshingly adult and frustratingly opaque, depending on the viewer's appetite for mystery. The use of the playing card Joker as the final symbol of the film is a piece of symbolism that rewards reflection, because the Joker is the wild card, the trickster, the element that disrupts all systems and defies all prediction, and by building her new team around this symbol, Stone is institutionalizing chaos, baking unpredictability into the structure of her organization, and betting that a little bit of chaos is the only antidote to the brittle, fragile perfection of the heart. The film's editing during the betrayal scene employs a technique of delayed reaction, holding on Parker's face for an extra beat after he pulls the trigger, showing not the impact of the bullets but the blank, terrifying calm of the man who fired them, a choice that prioritizes psychological horror over physical spectacle and makes the scene linger in the memory long after the more elaborate action sequences have faded. The character of Jack of Hearts, in his final evolution, becomes the film's most optimistic argument, a man who has lost his faith in the system he worshipped and has discovered, in its absence, a new faith in the people around him. A conversion experience that the film presents not as a dramatic, single moment, but as a quiet, gradual, almost imperceptible shift. The kind of change that happens not in the heat of crisis, but in the silence that follows. The film's use of screens within the frame, the constant presence of monitors, tablets, and holographic displays that mediate the character's experience of reality, is a formal strategy that keeps the audience at a slight, Brechtian remove from the action. A constant reminder that what we are watching is filtered, processed, and constructed, a truth that applies as much to the film itself as to the surveillance state it depicts. The relationship between Parker and Stone, before the betrayal, is written with a delicate, almost romantic ambiguity that makes his fall all the more tragic, because the film hints, in glances and hesitations and things left unsaid, that their connection was becoming something real, something that threatened to compromise her mission. And his betrayal is thus not just a professional disaster, but a personal one. The death of a possibility that the audience is only allowed to recognize in retrospect. The film's final negotiation scene, where Stone lays out her terms to the surviving charter leadership, is a quiet, almost mundane piece of bureaucratic theater that is, in its way, the most radical scene in the film, because it argues that real change does not happen through violent revolution or heroic sacrifice, but through the slow, patient, unglamorous work of reforming institutions from within. A deeply unfashionable, but probably correct political position. The color grading of the Icelandic sequences, with their bleached whites, pale blues, and absolute blacks, creates a visual environment that is almost entirely desaturated, a world drained of warmth and life, and this aesthetic choice makes the final scene, with its golden sunlight and its warm skin tones and its promise of a future, feel like a resurrection, a return from the cold, dead realm of pure logic to the warm, messy world of the living. The film's treatment of violence is notably uneven, veering from the bloodless, consequence-free spectacle of the CGI-heavy set pieces to the sudden, sickening, intimate brutality of the close-quarters executions, and this inconsistency, while perhaps unintentional, has the effect of making the real violence, the violence that leaves bodies on the floor and blood on the walls, feel more shocking, more transgressive, and more morally weighty. The character of Kia Doan's final choice to accept Stone's offer and join the charter is a leap of faith that mirrors Stone's own leap at the beginning of the film, a decision to trust a stranger, to join an organization she has every reason to hate, and to bet her future on the possibility that this time, this family, this purpose will not be a lie, a gamble that the film presents as both terrifying and hopeful. The film's philosophical debt to the ethical writings of Immanuel Kant, with its emphasis on the inviolability of individual human dignity and its rejection of utilitarian calculations that treat people as means to an end, is an unexpected intellectual lineage for a Netflix action movie. But it is there, in the script's persistent argument, that a single life saved against the odds is worth more than 100 lives sacrificed on the altar of probability. The sound of the film's final scene, the crunch of snow under boots, the distant whistle of wind, and the quiet, intimate tones of three people talking about their next mission, is a sonic palette that is the exact opposite of the digital, mediated earpiece and headset soundscape of the charter operations, an oral declaration that the future will be louder, messier, and more human than the past. The film's legacy, should it be remembered, will be as an artifact of a specific moment in the streaming wars, when platforms were willing to spend blockbuster budgets on original IP, when the line between theatrical and home entertainment was blurring, and when the global audience was being courted with stories that were deliberately, sometimes awkwardly, designed to play in every market and offend no one. The character of Stone's unnamed cat, a small, domestic, utterly vulnerable creature, is the film's most effective symbol of the ordinary life that espionage makes impossible. A reminder that behind every operative, every cover identity, and every mission, there is a person who feeds a cat, who worries about rent, who has a favorite chair, and the cat's death is the death of that person, the final, irreversible transformation of Rachel Stone into something that can no longer be hurt because there is nothing left to lose. The film's final, lingering image of three figures walking away from the camera and into the light is a conscious, perhaps even audacious, evocation of the great final shots of cinema history, from The Searchers to The Third Man, a visual rhyme that places this modest, imperfect, but earnest action film in a lineage of stories about lonely people who have done terrible things and are walking, however improbably, towards some kind of redemption. The film's credit sequence, a flowing river of digital data that coalesces into playing card motifs, functions as a visual thesis statement that the entire subsequent narrative will elaborate upon, suggesting that identity in this world is a matter of code, that human beings can be reduced to symbols and suits, and that the old, romantic, flesh-and-blood world of spycraft has been permanently replaced by something colder, faster, and infinitely more legible to those who know how to read the numbers. The casting of Gal Gadot, an Israeli actress whose national origin carries its own complex geopolitical resonance, as the face of a post-national, post-political peacekeeping organization, is a piece of extra-textual meaning that the film itself never directly addresses, but which hums beneath every scene. A silent acknowledgement that the fantasy of transcending national identity is always, in the real world, shadowed by the inescapable realities of where bodies come from and what histories they carry. The film's treatment of the MI6 team as a nostalgic throwback to a more analog, more human, more charmingly shambolic era of espionage, complete with their vinyl records, their Lizzo dance parties, and their worn leather jackets, positions them not just as characters, but as a eulogy for a dying world. A world that the Charter and its AI-driven efficiency have already rendered obsolete. And their deaths are thus not just a plot point, but a symbolic funeral for the 20th century spy genre itself. The Charter's headquarters, glimpsed in a few fleeting establishing shots, is a masterpiece of anti-architecture. A building that seems to have no edges, no corners, no national flag, and no address. A non-place that perfectly embodies the organization's aspiration to exist outside of geography, outside of politics, and outside of the messy, territorial, flag-waving world that has produced every war the Charter claims to prevent. The film's use of drone shots to establish its locations, sweeping aerial vistas of mountains, cities, and glaciers, is a visual language that aligns the audience's perspective with the heart's own omniscient, disembodied gaze, making us complicit in the surveillance aesthetic long before the plot has given us any reason to question it, a subtle conditioning that the film then spends its third act attempting to undo. The relationship between Parker and the Heart, once he takes control, is a dark parody of the relationship between Stone and Jack, with Parker's cold, monosyllabic commands and the Heart's obedient, affectless compliance creating a chilling portrait of a master-slave dynamic that has none of the warmth, the banter, or the mutual respect that characterizes the Charter's normal operations, a perversion that illustrates exactly what is at stake in the question of who controls the machine. The film's treatment of the digital world as a physical space that can be navigated, infiltrated, and fought over, a realm of server rooms and fiber optic cables and glowing data centers that is just as real and just as vulnerable as the physical locations, is a welcome departure from the common Hollywood trope of cyberspace as a weightless, abstract visual effects playground, grounding the digital conflict in the tangible, kickable, punchable infrastructure that actually runs the internet. The character of Kia's moral awakening, her slow, painful realization that Parker's quest for revenge has curdled into something indiscriminate and monstrous, is the film's most carefully calibrated character arc. A journey that is not marked by a single dramatic speech or a sudden, convenient change of heart, but by a series of small, horrified reactions. A dawning awareness that plays out silently on Bott's expressive face while the plot machinery grinds on around her. The film's final, quiet moment of Stone reclaiming the phrase, "stay in the van," a line that was once a dismissal and is now a command, is a small but perfect piece of dialogue writing, a a verbal callback that signals her completed arc without a trace of the smugness or self-congratulation that a lesser script would have slathered all over the moment, and Gadot delivers it with a quiet, tired satisfaction that feels earned rather than programmed. The ultimate, lasting impression of Heart of Stone is of a film that is simultaneously more intelligent than its critical reception would suggest and less successful than its ambitions deserve. A work that is caught between the genuine desire to say something meaningful about technology, trust, and the human condition, and the commercial imperative to be a globally palatable, friction-free, algorithmically optimized action product, a tension that is itself a perfect metaphor for the very argument the film is trying to make about the uneasy coexistence of human judgment and technological system.